If you pay close attention to many of the gatherings you find yourself into, you will notice a peculiar energy that you normally won't experience. Most people are attracted to this force and regularly like to experience it because it gives a sense of validation and belonging. This force can be called the social force. At a certain point, waves of excitement, anger, or joy move through us, shared by thousands of others. These emotions rise in us automatically, and under their influence, we might say or do things we would never do alone. Another way we experience this is when we are in a group assigned to complete a specific task in a short period of time. We feel a charge of energy that comes from feeling connected to others who are working with the same urgent spirit. These kind of feelings are not registered in us rationally, but come from an invisible force field that affects and binds a group of people through shared sensations and creates an intense feeling of connection. We can also experience this force in its reverse form, for example, from people who went through longer periods in isolation. In such accounts, they report that they begin to disconnect with reality and their personalities disintegrating. Interestingly enough, what they missed the most was not the presence of other people, but their eyes looking back at them. This stems back from our childhood. We formed our whole concept of ourselves in our first months as we looked at our mothers. Her return gaze gave us a sense that we existed. She told us who we were by how she looked at us. As adults, we experience the same kind of nonverbal validation and sense of self through the eyes of others who look at us. We are never really aware of this, and it would take a prolonged isolation to understand the phenomena. The social force can also make itself felt in our virtual worlds and virtual crowds. Although it is less intense than being in an actual crowd, we can still feel the presence of others in a phantom-like way through the screen. Now, it is important to keep in mind that the social force is neither positive nor negative, but many aspects of this force can become unproductive and dangerous. For example, our tendency to demonize outsiders and have deep suspicion towards them. In the old days, outsiders could mean threats of unknown infectious diseases or hostile intentions of the hunter-gatherers. Such group reactions are no longer relevant in our current age. And in fact, this unnecessary suspicion and paranoia can be responsible for the most cruel and genocidal behaviors, to the extent that the force may cancel our ability to think independently and rationally. This aspect, along with many others, exert a downward pull that can lead us into more primitive ways of behaving that are totally unsuited to modern conditions. Our solutions do not lie in denying the social force, which can only lead us to more primitive ways of behaving, nor it is in withdrawing to become nonconformists. It is in acknowledging it, becoming aware of our darker tendencies, and with such awareness, resisting the downward pull, and on a similar level, using the social force for positive and constructive purposes. This requires something called group intelligence. To acquire such intelligence, we need to master two basic elements. First being the individual effect of groups on us, and secondly the natural laws or dynamics which groups in general will always tend to fall into. The individual effect involves the following aspects. The desire to fit in. When you enter any given space or a group of people, your eyes automatically tend to look for any disapproval or criticism. This means that there is an unconscious desire to fit in. The first and the most basic way that you do that is appearances. You tend to wear the clothes they wear, emulate the way they talk, the kind of jokes they make, etc. The second and most important way that you do this is by adopting the group's values and beliefs that are pretty much specific to them. Your own ideas slowly shape themselves to those of the group. The longer you are in the group, the stronger and more insidious is this effect. Some people may outwardly rebel against such conformity, but they are usually the types who are eventually fired or marginalized. The need to perform. Studies have shown that we are much more likely to give money or help someone cross the road when others are looking at us. This is also natural and a primitive part of our nature, because saying things to fit into the group is one thing, but doing things is a whole different level. On the other hand, those who sulk and refuse to perform end up marginalized, as the group unconsciously expels such types. Now, this tendency of ours is not a bad thing, unless our sole purpose of doing such things is to impress the people, which can easily backfire and destroy our self-esteem and personal strength. Emotional contagion. When we were babies, we were highly sensitive to the moods and emotions of the mother. Her smiles elicited our own, and her anxiety made us tense. We evolved this high degree of empathy to the emotions of the mother as a survival mechanism long ago. Therefore, we are primed from an early age to sense and pick up the emotions of others, particularly those that are close to us. When we are alone, we are aware of our shifting moods. But the moment we enter the group and feel the eyes of others upon us, we become aware on unconscious levels of their moods and emotions. If these emotions are strong enough, they can even displace our own. On top of this, among those whom we feel comfortable and sense that we belong, we are less defensive and more vulnerable to this contagious effect. Hypercertainty. When we are on our own and think about our decisions and plans, we naturally feel doubts. Have we chosen the right career path? Did we say the right thing to get the job? Are we adopting the best strategy? But when we are in the group, this doubting, reflecting mechanism is neutralized. If everyone seems to agree that this is the right course of action, we are compelled to feel confident about the decision. And so, the fourth effect on us is to make us feel more certain, which makes us all the more prone to taking risks. Whenever you feel unusually certain and excited about a plan or idea, you must step back and gauge whether it is a viral group effect operating on you. If you can detach yourself for a moment from your excitement, you might notice how your thinking is used to rationalize your emotions. The group dynamics involve the following aspects. Group culture. When we travel to another country, we are aware of the differences in culture from our own. Not only do the inhabitants have their own language, but they also have customs, ways of looking at the world, and thinking that are different from our own. This is more pronounced among nations which have long traditions. But to a more subtle extent, we can see the same thing happening with a company or office. Now, each particular group has its own certain mood, specific ways, conducts, and style. When you enter any group, your goal is to acquaint yourself with such group dynamics. For this purpose, there is no need to pay attention to what the group says, but rather you should examine its actions and the emotional tone that prevails within. About the group culture, one thing is worth remembering. No matter the type of culture or how disruptive it might have been in its origins, the longer a group exists and the larger it grows, the more conservative it will become. This is an inevitable result of the desire to hold on to what people have made or built, and to rely on tried and true ways to maintain the status quo. This creeping conservatism will often be the death of the group, because it slowly loses the ability to adapt. Group rules and codes. For any human group, disorder and anarchy are too distressing, and so standards of conduct and rules for how to do things quickly evolve and become set. These rules and codes are never written down but are implicit. Violate them in some way and you risk becoming a non-entity or even being fired, without necessarily knowing the cause. In this way, the group imposes its own order without the need for active policing. The codes will regulate acceptable appearances, how much free talk is encouraged in meetings, the quality of obedience in relation to the bosses, and expected work ethic. When you are new to the group, you must pay extra attention to these tacit codes. The group code. Observe any community of chimpanzees at the zoo and you will notice the existence of an alpha male and other chimpanzees adapting their behavior to him, fawning, imitating, and struggling to forge closer ties. This is the pre-human version of the code. We humans created a more elaborate version in aristocratic courts dating from the earliest civilizations. In the aristocratic court, the subordinate members depended on the king or queen's favor to survive and thrive. The object of the game was to get closer to the man or woman on top without alienating the other courtiers, or to gang up and depose the leader, which is always a risky venture. The group court is subject to two basic things. The first is that the courtiers have to gain the attention of leaders and ingratiate themselves in some way. One way to do so is flattery. which is risky but oftentimes works because leaders generally have larger egos and a hunger for their high self-opinion validated. Another way to do so is competence, but you will have to be careful not to make the leader feel threatened by you. The second is that you must pay attention to the courtiers. Standing out too much, being seen as too brilliant or charming, will stir up envy, and you want to avoid this at all costs. You want as many courtiers on your side as possible. The third and final thing is that you must keep yourself aware of the dangerous types of courtiers that can be particularly toxic. There is nothing to be gained with them, so avoid both befriending them or making an enemy out of them. The group enemy. Since time immemorial, leaders have exploited the enemy reflex in humans for power, using the existence of the rival or enemy to justify almost anything and to distract from their own shortcomings. The enemy will be described as amoral, irrational, untrustworthy, or aggressive. The implication being that our group is the opposite. Of course, no side ever likes to admit that it is not pure in its ethics, has aggressive intentions, or is governed by emotion. Your job here is to pay close attention to such finger pointing. In many cases, the enemy is not exactly what it is portrayed to be, and so there is always something to be learned. Avoid being the victim of any exaggerated opinion. You want to see the reality just as it is. Group factions. Over enough time, individuals in a group will begin to split off into factions. This is because, in a group, we get a narcissistic boost from being around those who share our values. But in a group over a certain size, this becomes too abstract. The differences among the members become noticeable, and our power to influence the group as individuals is reduced. We want something more immediate, and so we form subgroups with those who seem even more like us. Oftentimes we see a particular negative dynamic. Without the knowledge of the group dynamics, it can be confusing to the outside observer. The ignorant can easily put the blame on one or the other. But the main reason for such repeated failures is the dysfunctional dynamic of the group itself, which tends to produce incompetent lieutenants and grandiose leaders. And unless it is fixed first, the problems keep recurring with different faces. In a dysfunctional culture, the members are often confused about their roles and the overall direction of the group itself. Amid such confusion, people start to think more of their own interests and agendas and form factions. Worried about their status and the health of the group, their egos become touchy, and they obsess over who's getting more. In this contentious atmosphere, the people of a lower character find numerous ways to stir up trouble and promote themselves. Those who excel at schmoozing and are good at nothing else but playing politics often thrive, rise to the top, and become lieutenants. In order for them to keep their power, mediocrity is preferred and rewarded. Leaders find themselves dragged down by all the internal games. Feeling vulnerable, they surround themselves with courtiers who tell them what they want to hear. Inside this cocoonish court, leaders hatch ill-conceived and grandiose plans, which are encouraged by the spineless courtiers. The solution to all these problems is not changing this or that person, but it is to alter our perspectives and focus on fixing the group dynamic instead of people. What creates a functional, healthy dynamic is the ability of the group to maintain a tight relationship to reality. The reality for a group is that it exists in order to get things done, to make things, and to solve problems. It has certain resources it can draw upon, like the labor and strengths of its members and its finances. It operates in a particular environment that is almost always highly competitive and constantly changing. The healthy group puts primary emphasis on the work itself, on getting the most out of its resources and adapting to all the inevitable changes. It does not waste time on endless political games, and so such a group can accomplish 10 times more than the dysfunctional variety. It brings out the best in human nature, like people's empathy and their ability to work with others on a high level. It remains the ideal for all of us. This ideal group can be called the reality group. Keep in mind that if you inherit a culture that is firmly set and dysfunctional, your job is harder and it will take more time. The following are 5 key strategies for achieving this. instill a collective sense of purpose. That social force that compels people to want to belong and to fit in, you want to capture and channel for a higher purpose. You accomplish this by establishing an ideal, like a definite purpose or a positive mission that unites its members. Assemble the right team of lieutenants. As the leader of a reality group, you need the ability to focus on the larger picture and the overall goals that matter. You have only so much mental energy, and you must marshal it wisely. The greatest obstacle to this is your fear of delegating authority. Let information and ideas flow freely. As the group evolves, your greatest danger is the slow formation of a bubble around you. The lieutenants, trying to ease your burdens, may eventually isolate you from what is happening throughout the group and filter the information they provide you without realizing it. They tell you what they believe will please you and keep out the noise that is important to hear. Your perspective to reality slowly becomes distorted, and your decisions reflect this. Your only solution is to establish a free flow of information from top to the bottom. Infect the group with productive emotions. In the group setting, people are naturally more emotional and permeable to the moods of others. You must work with human nature and turn this into a positive by infecting the group with the proper set of emotions. Keep in mind that the most positive and productive emotion is calmness. Forge a battle-tested group. It is essential that you know your group well, its strengths and weaknesses, and the maximum you can expect of it. But appearances can be deceiving. In their day-to-day work, people can seem motivated, connected, and productive. But add some stress or pressure or even a crisis, and suddenly you see a whole other side of them. Some begin to think more about themselves and disconnect from the group spirit. Others become far too anxious and infect the group with their fears. Part of the reality you need to be on top of is the actual strength of your team. Oftentimes, we like to focus on the psychological health of individuals and how perhaps a therapist could fix any problems they might have. What we don't consider, however, is that being in a dysfunctional group can actually make individuals unstable and neurotic. But the opposite is true as well. By participating in a high-functioning reality group, we can make ourselves healthy and whole.